Tanse, Kisha Supernant and Zikatson, Miskuchiwa Skyganutinia, Nimichifnia. Hello, I'm Dr. Kisha Supernant, and I'm director of the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology. And in this short video today, I want to tell you a little bit about our vision for the Institute and encourage you to become involved in a way that is appropriate for you. So I am a Métis woman. I have deep family connections to many Métis families in the lands currently known as Alberta. And I started at the University of Alberta as an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology in 2010. In July of 2019, I assumed the position of director of what was then the Institute of Prairie Archaeology, which had previously been directed by Dr. Jack Ives, and you'll be able to view a short video of his soon. When I took over the directorship, I had a vision for expanding on the good foundational work that the Institute had been doing over the previous 11 years and building a stronger and more clearly articulated vision of community-engaged and community-driven Indigenous archaeology. With this vision, I outlined sort of three core areas for the Institute to focus on. The first of which was practice. So what is the practice of archaeology and how can that be expanded and transformed by working alongside Indigenous communities in areas that are of interest and of benefit to them? In particular, we look at how different Indigenous ways of knowing and being can inform archaeological practice and create spaces for communities to have a leading voice in how archaeology is done, where it's done, and how information is then stored and transmitted about the history of the lands in which we work. The research of IPIA is primarily focused in Western Canada. We've had active research projects in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia, and continue to have connections to work that is ongoing in Utah. And a lot of the lands on which we work have diverse Indigenous histories. We work with nations that are currently located on those lands to develop research projects that are of interest to the community and that can be supported by the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology. We have a number of current research projects ranging from using the archaeological record to understand Métis emergence and contemporary Métis rights. We also work with a lot of Indigenous communities to help locate unmarked burials, both in historic cemeteries and around residential schools. And we are active collaborators on projects in unceded Tsimshian lands in British Columbia as well. All of this is designed to help to transform and move forward the conversations about how archaeology can be responsive to Indigenous needs, how we can move beyond settler colonial understandings of the past, which have been so central to a lot of previous archaeological work, and how we can make and hold better space for Indigenous peoples to become archaeologists themselves and to make decisions about how their cultural heritage should be managed, protected, curated, and owned. As part of that is a second part of our vision, which is policy. We're really interested in doing work that continues to invite conversation about the responsibilities of researchers, including archaeologists, to uphold Indigenous data sovereignty. We see under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, for example, that some of those enshrined rights include the right to control and make decisions about cultural heritage. Of course, the legal and colonial landscape of Canada, particularly in terms of how heritage legislation operates at a provincial level, means there's a diversity of experiences of Indigenous peoples within cultural resource management. And things like how ancient materials are cared for and held in different institutions. So we invite conversations about how we might create better space and be more responsible to these principles of Indigenous data sovereignty, with the ultimate goal of supporting and upholding Indigenous rights to make decisions about cultural heritage. And I have recently joined the board of directors of a national organization called the Indigenous Heritage Circle. And this group is at its core about upholding Indigenous rights to cultural heritage, broadly described, including everything from archaeology and museum practice to cultural landscapes and historic site recognition. And so this work is very integral to our vision of the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology. And the third part of the vision is pedagogy. So changing the ways in which we teach archaeology to the next generation. So this includes teaching at the undergraduate level and also the ways we support and mentor graduate students. This includes making space for Indigenous ways of knowing and being in the classroom environment and field environments, creating opportunities for Indigenous elders and knowledge holders to share with those students and to encourage them to think deeply about the foundations of archaeology itself in terms of what gives non-Indigenous archaeologists the right to do research on Indigenous histories, often without full permission and engagement with the Indigenous communities who live there today. So all of this provides an opportunity for students to learn in a different way about the past and about how we understand it as archaeologists. We also have a lot of strength in methods, and so we work on teaching students about a diversity of new technologies and methods, including remote sensing and GIS and mapping and other forms of digital archaeology to find innovative ways to explore the past while doing less disturbance to the ground itself. And this is partly our commitment to Indigenous communities who may not always be supportive of large-scale excavations, but may still be interested in learning about the past. So all of these three areas, practice, policy, and pedagogy, form the core of this vision of the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology. And overall, what we want to do is invite a reimagining of what archaeology can be, including one that makes space and may center Indigenous ways of knowing and being, but also providing an opportunity to think about the very foundation of archaeology. We have students who are doing research projects that are very community driven, and we have students who are doing research projects that examine how archaeological thinking and rhetoric get taken up in new religious movements and the far right. And we invite archaeologists from all backgrounds, recognizing that archaeology has not always been a welcoming and inclusive space for folks who may not fit a particular, mold of who an archaeologist should be. So one of my core goals as director is to foster an inclusive and supportive community of scholars. And this includes undergraduate and graduate students. It includes research associates and other faculty members, and particularly wanting to hold space for those who may not otherwise have felt that there is space for them within the discipline of archaeology. This includes people from BIPOC communities, disabled peoples who are on the LGBTQIA2S+ spectrum, bringing in different ways of understanding what it means to be in the world enriches archaeological practice, and is my commitment to make sure that that archaeology doesn't become an unwelcome space for the folks who work with us in the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology. So at its core, we want to imagine a new way of being archaeologists and doing research and doing projects that matter, and that matter a lot to contemporary communities, and that contemporary community can be quite broadly defined, but at the core of the mission as well is the responsibility of being located on Treaty 6 territory and on the Métis homeland, and the responsibilities that that entails. So we hope that you want to learn more about the Institute and browse other videos in our series where we invite voices from our previous director, from our current students, and from our community partners to tell you a little bit more about what the Institute is and what it can do. We also invite you to explore our website and look at different ways to become involved, whether you're a prospective graduate student, whether you're a researcher who wants to keep abreast of what we're doing, or whether you're someone who would like to get involved in some of our collaborative projects. There are many different ways to connect to the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology, and we hope you'll join us on this journey. Hi, and thank you for listening.